Morning, Jim.
Morning.
Thanks for agreeing to do this. This is really helpful. I think that when students are have material in the class that is real information from real project managers, particularly project managers who are here at ASU, I feel like that's much more valuable than just reading whatever they're reading in the textbook. That it's making that link between the kind of sterile stuff it says in the textbook and, well, what does that really look like in the real world? And particularly when it's an ASU project manager, I think that's even more helpful because it's demonstrating this is how we do it here at ASU. So thank you for agreeing to do this. Would you mind just saying who you are and your length of service here at ASU?
Sure.
and where you're located and what you do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to help. My name is James Selmer. I work for Arizona State University in the University Technology Office. I primarily focus on information security projects. Been with the university for a little over 5 years at this point. However, I've been practicing the field of project management probably for over 20 years, and most of those in the field of information technology. Not only am I an employee of ASU now, but I am also an alumni of ASU. I went to school here, received my Master's of Business Administration, graduated in 2003. So I have a lot of ties to the school, and so again, happy to be here.
Thanks. So one of the areas that I wanted to focus on first is in terms of how a project manager needs to know enough about how procurements happen or contracting, because a lot of what gets accomplished on some projects is done through contracting out to either to purchase products, purchase stuff, or to purchase services. And so a project manager, whatever organization they're in, they're not a replacement for a contract manager, but they're working with contract managers. Is that what they're called here, as a contract manager, or some other terminology used?
Well, we have a procurement office,
okay.
And within the procurement office they have folks that are responsible for dealing with contracts. We have buyers, there's negotiators, procurement officers. Even within the University Technology Office, we have certain folks that are designated to that role, and they handle much of the relationship between our office and the procurement office, because there are formal processes that need to be followed.
The procurement processes. So there's buyers, there's negotiators. Are those different individuals?
My understanding is they are.
Okay.
So,
cool. Yeah. So as can you describe, through telling us about one project, what your, like, a set of experiences that you've had?
Sure.
That have that reveal some things about what you have had to do from the project management side to make sure that the procurement management things going on worked well for the project goals that you were focused on?
Well, sure. Before you get to the point of procurement, there's a couple of things that you have to have ready as you enter into that process. So you want to make sure that the work effort that's being introduced here is well defined. So you want to scope that out. You want to make sure that you document what is needed. Make sure that you have the right resources, vet out that scope of work. And then you need to present that to the responsible person or party that would need to approve the funding for that. So even before you get into the process of actual procurement and buying, you need to make sure that you have a good idea of what the work will involve. So what types of things are going to be needed, what are you actually going to be purchasing, and make sure that you have that well estimated as to your best ability, and then make sure that the person who is responsible for that budget understands that as well, and they have approved that set of work. Once you have that, then you can start to take the steps to enter into the procurement process.
So the statement of work, the or the scope of work, statement of work, scope of work, the SOW. Is that something in your, like, pick a project that you've managed? Were you writing that entire thing yourself? Did you have other people writing parts of it? How'd you do the estimating for that? I mean, that sounds like a really, like, how expert did you have to be in order to make sure that that was well done?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's kind of a common answer, but it depends. So as we talked before, I think two of the most important concepts of being a project manager is communication and flexibility. And when you go into a work effort, in the first few weeks or so, you get a feel for what is the level of expertise that I have currently at my disposal. What are people's availability? And what resources am I going to have for certain tasks? And that's the interesting thing about a project manager is sometimes with that flexibility concept, you're going to have to wear certain hats. So you may have access to someone like a business analyst that has expertise in a certain area that can take, basically do an interview with you or some subject matter experts and write a set of requirements that can help you build that scope of work. You may not have that. You may not have that expertise at hand. That might be something that we will need to eventually put into your procurement plan. You may need to say, you know what, this is something we want to do, but before we move forward, we need to do some additional analysis. So, in other words, procurement may not be an all or nothing type of engagement. There might be several steps in the procurement process. And you may decide to structure your projects that way. So, for example, in the past, the way we've worked with certain projects, I'll give you an example. We were looking at our network access control system for wireless at ASU. And the current network access control system wasn't performing to expectations. And so one of the things that we needed to decide before we purchased a new system or a replacement for that system was we needed to do an evaluation. And so there was actually, if you want to call it a pre-project or a predecessor project, that really had its own beginning and end, where we said, let's do the evaluation. Again, let's define what we're trying to do here. Let's look at the benefits and perhaps the issues or problems we're having with the current environment, the current system. Let's look at other products that are out there on the market. And usually it's kind of the rule of three. You want to have a minimum of 3 other things that you can evaluate, or 3 different offerings that you can evaluate. And take those, those benefits and issues and evaluate those other products in the marketplace as well. And then bring in some subject matter expertise. Now, again, going back to procurement, you may need to go out and say, listen, I need a small amount of budget, bring in some expertise to do this proper vetting and evaluation before we get into actually implementation of a new system. So we'll need a very small amount of budget, and we're going to ask for maybe 30 days or 60 days, whatever time the schedule kind of flushes out to, and do that evaluation prior to that. And so when you do these types of evaluations, you're going to say, well, we're either going to keep what we have, we're going to move into something different, or maybe we did and this kind of is more of a rare occurrence, but you evaluated all 3 things and none of them are going to work out for us. We got to start over and look at something else. So typically in those scenarios, when it comes to procurement, it's a little easier to go through the process because the dollar values are lower. And so dollar values or costs, the amount of funding that's required for certain efforts, sometimes will impact the, I guess
It's like the number of steps or the number of...
the rigor that goes into the procurement process.
Right. Right.
So for example, if it's at ASU, there's certain dollar thresholds, and if a purchase is over a certain dollar threshold, you need to go through a certain process. If it's under that, you can use like P cards, or you can use funding, and it doesn't require certain approvals. And so it's a little bit easier to kind of streamline and move forward quickly, to apply a little bit of funding to reach your goal.
Right. So you're in essence, you're kind of breaking the project into sub-projects where you have like a decision gate in between those sub-projects where you're having that analysis phase. You're doing that as a separate project.
Sure.
And because the funding is lower, the risk is lower.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like for example, the situation you described where you have to, you want to hire a subject matter expert to come in and assist with the analysis, because that's expertise, no one has that in-house.
Right.
So the risk is you could hire someone who really doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, that's a possibility.
Sure.
But
It's a risk. Yeah.
but it's only it's under $100,000 probably, right? And it's like you said, it's only a short time frame. So if that were to be the case, you probably would recognize that the person is just blowing smoke pretty quickly. You'd be able to cancel that contract and issue a new one. But so the risk is much lower by breaking it into these component parts.
Well, and that's a good point to make, is you have to make sure that you structure your contracts accordingly. So if you feel going into an effort that is a risk, or that's a major concern, and you want to make sure that you structure the contract in a way that there is an out clause where you can, so you say, well, we estimate that it's going to be this set of hours and it's going to cost us this much, but if we feel like you get in a week or two into this effort and this resource that's provided to us isn't giving us what we were expecting to get, then we can cancel and we can recoup the rest of the funding that the contract would have covered. So that's an important part of procurement as well. Going back to the point about requirements, it's important, again, like I said, to try to scope out the effort as much as possible, because all of that is going to lead into the areas of cost and the areas of contract and procurements as well, right? So you want to make sure that it's clearly defined what you're trying to do. We were talking about the examples of building a house. So is this, you want to make sure that, okay, if we're defining that we're going to be building a house, that's clearly defined within the scope, what that house needs to look like, what type of house it's going to be, the size and features and whatnot, and that it's not going to include maybe the garage would be separate,
Right.
And we want to make sure that the person who is in charge of approving the requirements of the work effort and also in charge of the funding doesn't have the expectation that, oh, there's going to be a garage as well.
Right.
So you don't want that to come back and haunt you later, because then if that's not an expectation that's written and documented and approved up front, and that comes back later, then that can screw up your costs, that can screw up your contracts, that can screw up your time to be able to meet your schedule, because if you've got to go back and add that later, that could definitely cause issues in those areas. So
absolutely. And clients frequently, you can have great meetings with clients, and you've got lots of forms and documentations and minutes and notes from the meetings and the decisions made and everything, and the communication is really well done between the project management team and the client. And clients can still think and say, oh, I thought we were also going to be doing XYZ, even though XYZ was never discussed at any of the meetings. They can say, but didn't we talk about that early on? So I thought that was going to be part of the project too. And so you're absolutely right. This responsibility of the project manager to be communicating what is in scope, and to also be mentioning, so that means we're not doing X, and we're not doing this, and we're not doing that, is really important. And so sometimes this over communication that a project manager has to do can look not quite normal
Right.
to other people. It's like, why are you telling people what we're not gonna do?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So a project manager's, the kinds of communication that a project manager does, for example, is quite different than somebody from a marketing sort of perspective would do.
Right.
Where they like to leave things vague and to allow clients to like build up those expectations. Project managers are way over on the other side of the spectrum, constantly, referring to things. Well, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're not, and reminding people that those things are outside the scope of the project.
They're very important. And I think one of the things about procurement that's important as well is get started with procurement early. So especially, for example, like at a place like Arizona State University, we have procurement offices. There's certain business rules that we need to be aware of as far as how procurement is managed at ASU. There may also be other rules, such as the fact that ASU is a public entity, and there's certain rules and regulations, and that's the advantage of having a team like that, is that's their job to understand what those are. But the important thing is that you get involved with them early, so they can say, oh, by the way, you can say, I think even in the early ages of scoping, the early stages of scoping and requirements gathering, you can say, well, this is the work effort we have. I think it's going to be a ballpark around, rough order of magnitude, it might be around this size. What kind of things do I need to know about the procurement process? And that way, they can inform you so that you can build that into your schedule, build that into your plan early, and say to the team, okay, well, this is over a certain dollar amount, so we're going to have to go through an RFP process. Request for proposal, and we're going to have to get a minimum of 3 bids, and there might be other requirements attached to that as well, and so it's important to know those up front so that you can plan for that, and that you make sure you build in that time as well. So again, get involved with the procurement process or the procurement team early on so that you understand those things.
Right, so you can link, like what you're doing from the project management perspective, link that in and make those connections between your tasks and responsibilities with what the procurement team is doing as well. Absolutely, and it sounds like that would relate too in terms of when you're, especially when the procurement is involved with perhaps like a semi or a custom made, when the work being done is to create some sort of customized product or set of products that are going to be delivered. The responsibility and the role that you as the project manager have to receive those deliverables, and then usually is there like a time frame that you have to review and do your quality control inspection or whatever it might be called to, and then to indicate your acceptance of those deliverables, because sometimes like after a certain time frame, if you haven't rejected them, then by default you've accepted them. So there's, and that's that's like a procurement rule, but it heavily impacts your project.
Right, yeah. Upon delivery, you always want to expect that you received all the equipment that you ordered and it's in good working condition, of course, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible to do it right away, but that's, again, if you take the time to manage your schedule the right way, and that's a good point, is you would want to schedule the ordering, know the lead time, schedule the ordering at a certain point so that the equipment comes in at the appropriate time so that it can be inspected, evaluated, and then it can be implemented so that you can be able to test its functionality. And if there's something that's not working correctly, you can make sure that you get that returned for the right part and things like that. So.